All right, welcome everybody. It looks like we've gone live. I want to thank you for joining the session. My name is Bill Franks, and I'm going to be taking you through a pretty rapid fire overview of some of the key tips in the book, Winning the Room. And I think this is really relevant for the Data Innovators Conference because of the fact that it doesn't matter how many great innovations you may find in your data. If you don't prepare and present that information well, you're not going to end up having the impact that you otherwise could. And so this book was based on my experience. I spent many, many years effectively traveling around the US and the world, speaking with and presenting to large companies about their analytics strategies and where they were heading, et cetera. And I've also seen a similar number. And so from that, I learned a lot of lessons the hard way. And I've seen a lot of people make mistakes repeatedly, and that's what I put into the book. So we're going to go through pretty quickly 3 phases: planning, developing, and delivering the presentation. I'm just going to take 1 or 2 tips from each section. There's well over 100 in the book. Obviously, we'll just go through a few today. I also just want to level set one thing, that this book and the talk today is about a live presentation in front of a live audience. So many of these tips might apply equally well if you're going to be doing a paper or other type of document, but these are specifically oriented towards you getting in front of a room. Now, it's also going to be very basic visuals that I'm using for 2 reasons. First of all, I want to illustrate a point very clearly. But second of all, and equally important, 95% of all the presentations today, whether we like it or not, are still done in basic PowerPoint and Excel charts and graphs. So I've tried to keep it to look as familiar as possible. So the first phase is to make sure you have your fundamental strategy right. There's a couple of key foundational points that you have to keep in mind if you're going to get the audience to understand what you found, get the implications of those results, and then most importantly, take action. That's what you have to do. And so it doesn't matter whether you put together pretty slides or whether you have great results. If you mess up a couple of these foundational strategies, you're not going to go anywhere. So the first one is that results are actually not the biggest factor in success in an analytics or data science project. And I know that this will seem to some folks, especially if you're more hands-on today, as a somewhat shocking statement, but it's actually unfortunately true in the real world. I always like to say that at most 50% of the success of a live data-driven presentation in a business context is having accurate results. And at least 50% is how well you then prepare, package, and present those results in context so that that non-technical audience, and your audience is almost always non-technical, will understand what you did and then take action upon it. Now, in an ideal world, of course, it would be all about the results. And my making this statement doesn't mean that results aren't critically important, because they are. You absolutely have to have good results, but they're necessary and not sufficient to have a success. Another thing is that the whole point of a live presentation is that you're there to add value and to discuss whatever you found. So you want to be telling a story, not writing a story. So here's a horrible slide, like many we've seen, tons of text. It's too small to read. If you do start to read this, what happens is on this specific slide, you'll notice it's just a bunch of throwaway text. However, in a real presentation, you put something like this on, not only does it look sloppy, but everyone in the room is going to start reading your slide. When they're reading your slide, they are explicitly not listening to you and your story. They're also beginning to form their own impressions, their own conclusions, their own action plans before you put any of the context on. It's bad all the way around. When you're up in front of the room, it should be about you. Now, let's just take this slide. If you were going to present something like this, if you notice, there's 4 key actions. You should distill it down into a very basic slide. And I would actually use animations here to bring each of these green points up one at a time as I talk to it. Point here is, it's obvious that you need to listen to what I say because there's not much on the slide. Second, if you do go and read everything on the slide, you'll be done very, very quickly. Your attention is back on me. So you have to break yourself from writing a paper or writing a Word document with a bunch of detail. It's appropriate in those settings. When you're doing a live presentation, particularly to a non-technical audience, you've got to keep it as simple as possible. Now, one thing that often gets shortchanged is the planning of the presentation. You've got to make sure you've thought through exactly what you want to communicate, how you want to communicate it, in what detail, and what actions you want folks to take. A movie maker doesn't go and just start shooting scenes at random and then expect that hopefully it'll come into a good movie at the end. They've got detailed script for all the verbiage that the actors are going to say. But in addition, they've scripted the entire scene. Where's that car going to move and everything else. That's what you have to do in your presentation. Make sure that you've designed it and you think it through up front. And one of the key things is, as you lay out your information, you want to make sure that you're focusing on how to use your results in the business context, not how you got the results. And a quick example of this, imagine you go into a car dealership and, car salespeople are very excited about cars and the technology in cars. You ask how the backup camera works. If that salesperson starts saying, oh man, it's awesome. We've got a 1080p high def LCD monitor connected by an HDMI cable to an onboard computer with this type of processor, this type of GPU. It's going to put some vectors, graphics onto the screen to show you where you're going, et cetera, et cetera. Almost everybody who asks, how does this backup camera work, is completely overwhelmed and uninterested in those details. What most people probably want to hear is, oh, the camera is going to show you where you're going and even show you your trajectory. If you hear a beep, stop. The point is, a lot of people will ask a question that in an expert's terms means one thing, but in a non-technical, non-expert's terms means something else. So when someone says to you in a meeting, how does this model work? They almost certainly don't want to know about how you minimized error and how you calculated your parameters. They probably want to know, let's say in a response model context, how does this response model work? Well, we're going to give every one of our customers a probability of response. We can rank the customers by that. You tell us how many people you want to target. We'll give you that list. Done. So always think in terms of what does your audience reasonably want to hear, not what would you want to see as the expert. You also want to show the fewest numbers necessary. And this is counterintuitive a little bit because we spend weeks or months creating number after number after number as we do an analysis. But let's take a super simple example. And I see things like this all the time. 5 products, 4 quarters, and some totals. 30 numbers on this slide. That's a lot to absorb. But worse, if you notice, I have a headline. Organic honey grew by over 50%. You can see that trend if you take some time and effort to go dig into the table and actually find where that row is. But here's another problem. There's other data on this slide that I'm not trying to talk to here. Somebody in the audience might care more about regular honey or flavored honey, and they're going to get lost in those other details I don't want them looking at. So what you want to do in a scenario like this is extract exactly the information you want them to focus on at any point in time and make a chart for it. Over a period of a presentation, I might cover almost every number on that chart I just came from. That could even be in the appendix where I could say all of the sales are there. But at any point in time, you want to make it painfully clear exactly what you're talking about and show only the minimum information. Because again, it's a live presentation where your goal is to keep their attention and get them doing what they need. You also have to focus heavily on business and practical significance in addition to statistical or technical significance. And this is a hugely common error, particularly with people who are less experienced. So, I've seen examples of something like this, hey, we're 99% confident that we'll get a 10% lift in sales. That sounds great until you put a pragmatic filter of the costs. And if this thing costs a whole lot to do, it could actually be a big, big money loser. So you have to make sure you're putting the lens of practicality on top of all the math and science that you've done and account for things like the cost of action. What is the corporate strategy? And is this, you might have a specific tactic that would work, but that goes against the corporate strategy. Are there any laws and regulations? Resource availability? There's a whole lot of things outside of the pure numbers. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen meetings derailed when someone technical comes in with technically true results, but they're just not practical. Your next thing is wording in text. You've got to word things in a way that make it easy to understand. So one is always put things as simple as possible. Here's just a classic example I see all the time, and my students do this all the time. Accuracy, sensitivity, specificity, if you build a response model. These are the technical terms. No one in the real world knows what these mean. In fact, I'll bet half of you in the audience, even if you do data science for a living, struggle to remember which is sensitivity, which is specificity. I know I do, because they're not a natural term and they sound similar. In reality, put it in their language. True positive rate, true negative rate, for example. Most people will understand that. So someone's going to invariably say, well, what does sensitivity mean? In order to explain it, you're going to come back and use these kind of English terms, but then the leave behind as well as your slide isn't going to have this, and they're not going to remember later. So you want to keep things as simple as possible and put it in the terms that will match with your audience. You got to think through the same thing with numbers and labels. People love to show precision, and a lot of statistical packages will spit out 8, 9 decimal places by default. Here's a very basic point to make. Yummy flavor outsold yucky 5-1. Do I really need numbers down to the penny at the hundreds of millions of dollars level to prove this point and percentages to the thousandth? Not really. It's a lot easier for an audience if you just round it and keep it simple. If the point is 5-1, you can see that 5-1 here very easily. You also got to think about your charts, the type of charts you use, how you lay them out. But one of the biggest things I see people make a mistake is showing technical diagrams, architectural diagrams, other things along those lines. Now, they might be important to have in an appendix. They might be important to show to your technical peers, but your non-technical audience, particularly if they're a business audience, doesn't care. So I always say you can put up a technical architecture diagram to a non-technical audience. You can spend 5 minutes explaining it. They probably won't get it anyway. And you've actually undercut your credibility a bit because you're reinforcing the point that you may be too technical to help them. So here's what they're going to see no matter what you say with an architecture diagram. It's a bunch of gibberish. Put it in the appendix for the typical business audience and leave it out. Now, once you built your presentation, you've got to get ready. You have to really know what are you going to say, how are you going to connect the dots, where are your strong points and your weak points, and you need to practice and get ready for this delivery because it's critically important. So speaking of practice, the first thing you have to do, you have to practice your presentation. I know very few people who would draft a document and email it on its first draft without any review. I know few people who would develop a PowerPoint and not review it a couple of times. But I do know people who would show up in front of a room for an important presentation, having never verbalized what they're about to say before, effectively their first draft of their talk. You literally need to go through this. I've done it in a hotel room by myself countless times the night before a presentation. I just walk around the room, walking through my presentation. And what this does, it forces me to make sure I know exactly what I'm going to say. And invariably, I find somewhere where I'm stumbling or I'm not connecting the dots, and I get my act together. I'll find places where I think some points need to have their order reversed or where I realize I need to be a little more clear. Without going through it and hearing yourself do it, you just aren't going to get it right. The other thing is to focus on time and not slide counts. It's one of my biggest pet peeves. Various people say it's 1 minute per slide, 2 minutes, 4 minutes. The answer is it's any of those. I have slides I spend 10 minutes on. I have slides I spend 10 seconds on. If you have 30 minutes and you're going to hit 30 minutes, that's all that matters. Don't worry if you have 3 slides or 30 slides. Hit your time. I see a lot of energy wasted in presentation preparation, attempting to hit an arbitrary slide count when really what matters is hitting your time frame. So make sure that you know your time frame and make sure you can hit it, and don't bend to pressure to add or remove things just to hit a count of slides. It's also helpful to look for opportunities as you're going through your final prep to make numbers stand out. So let's say I have a super basic table here. There's only 4 numbers on it, but what is it that I really want people to focus on? There's a variety of ways that you can draw people's attention. You can do things like have a little circle come in and highlight. You can bold or even drop an arrow on top of that bolding. You can do things like a highlight to bring it out and make it hard to miss. You can go through and say, this is a really key point. I'm going to add a highlight at the last minute to my presentation in order to bring it out. And you can do similar things with text. You can make text bold or a different color, etc. But you want to make it as easy as possible for the audience to focus exactly where you need them at any point in time. And then finally, and I know I'm going through this rapid fire, but this is what we get for 20 minutes. So hopefully you're able to hang on here. You got to give this presentation. And when you're giving it, you have to win the trust and confidence of your audience, who often doesn't have the background and knowledge you do about analytics, that you do understand their business problem, you have found something meaningful, and that they should, in fact, take action on your recommendations. So one of the first things is stress the positive. I'm not saying being misleading, but focus on the positive results you have. Technical people tend to have want to really be honest and upfront about every caveat, every negative. And there's good in that. And you should be honest, but don't spin yourself to where you're making your results bad. Let's say I say in an analysis, hey, you know what? We've got some great results, but we haven't been able to complete the analysis for the Northeast region. So we can't yet recommend that we roll this out nationwide. That's kind of a bummer end to what is could have been an exciting meeting. What you want to be saying is great news. We have validated these results are amazing in every region but the Northeast. We should get started planning the implementation for every region but the Northeast. In the meantime, we're finishing the Northeast validation. We should have that done by the time you're ready to focus on it anyway. It's a much more positive spin. Let's look at another example. This is true, but a little bit negative. Given unexpected data issues, we weren't able to produce any results for specialty products category. You end with something like that, it's very negative. Let's think about a more positive spin. We've got confidence we can roll this out for all of our products across all lines except for specialty products. We're validating specialty products as we speak, but we're confident the results are going to hold there as well. Again, semantics really matter. And in the business world, a lot of times people nuance and how you say things matter. People aren't as blunt and direct as we might be with each other. You also want to connect the dots. Your audience, here's a great statistic, complications drop by 10%. But what does that really mean to what in a medical situation people care about? Connect those dots. This is this much drop in hospitalization, deaths, and equally important cost per patient. This is the number your audience is going to care about. If you leave it to them to connect these dots, they may not do it, and then they won't act on your results, or they may do it wrong, in which case they could have a wrong conclusion. Connect the dots all the way. And last point I'll leave you with is close with a wow tied to a larger context. Even if you're doing a tactical campaign analysis for today, the more you can say, this is great, and we can do this campaign again next quarter, and we'll make some money. But remember, in this case, that two of our core corporate strategic initiatives for the next 3 to 5 years are more organic honey business and more direct consumer interactions. This campaign also hits both of those. So not only is this going to be a winner for us next quarter, it's helping us meet our strategic goals in the coming years, to which your non-technical audience in the room thinks, ooh, there's my bonus, there's my promotion. This is going to look great for me. So when you can tie things, even when you have a tactical assignment for a specific analysis or a specific initiative, look for the opportunity to tie into the bigger ones. So with that, I'll thank everybody. Here's my contact information in case you have any questions later. And the book Winning the Room is available on Amazon and other booksellers. So thank you very much.